Good morning, Chitralekha. Good morning, Mehul. Good morning to all of you who have joined and who are about to join. Nikhil, Soumya. Shalvi. Trida. Taran. Okay, so today we have to discuss about the Weapons of Mass Destruction Amendment Bill 2022, which seeks to amend the Weapons of Mass Destruction Act 2005. Now, before we proceed, it is important for us to give each other a little idea about weapons of mass destructions. What are WMDs, weapons of mass destruction? What are WMDs? Good morning, Stuti, Prableen, Riaz. Very warm greetings to all of you. And I said that we are going to discuss Weapons of Mass Destruction Amendment Bill 2022 that seeks to amend the Weapons of Mass Destruction Act 2005. And before we proceed, it is important for us to ponder upon the concept of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. So let us give each other a little idea about weapons of mass destruction. Anybody who can shed some light on what are weapons of mass destruction? It's important to know what are weapons of mass destruction before we talk about the amendment bill 2022. It's important to know about it. Mehul says a weapon of mass destruction is a nuclear, radiological, chemical, biological, or any other weapon that can kill and bring significant harm to numerous individuals. Very good. Biological weapons, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, which can do potential harm and damage. Okay, they are weapons of mass destruction, right? They can cause irreparable loss. Okay, isn't it? Biological weapons, chemical weapons, conventional weapons, they all are included in the list of weapons of mass destruction, who do a lot of damage, who does potential harm, okay, and irreparable loss, which becomes really difficult for the country which is under attack to handle. Okay, so Weapons of Mass Destruction Act, we had Weapons of Mass Destruction Act. There are so many weapons of mass destruction. There are chemical weapons, there are conventional weapons, there are biological weapons. Okay, biological weapons, it's important to know what are biological weapons. Like, any example of a biological weapon? Yes, Somesh, weapons being used in Russia-Ukraine war. Yes, Nikhil, weapons which can harm large amount of people in a single go. That's right. But tell me, what do you mean by biological weapons? Taran says weapons that possess the capacity to bring Armageddon in the world. They can be of any category, vis-a-vis biological, nuclear, chemical, etc. Agent Orange used in Vietnam War, Stuti. Biological weapon. Any recent example? This COVID-19. Exactly, Mehul. Biological weapons are microorganisms like virus, bacteria, fungi, or other toxins that are produced and released deliberately to cause disease and death in humans, animals, or plants. So, COVID 19 can be, there are so many theories regarding COVID 19 that it was deliberately made in a Wuhan lab in China, and it is a biological weapon which China intended to spread around the world and to plunge the world economy into into utter doldrums. So these are also the theories which are working simultaneously in today's new world order, where we have plethora of theories. We can have this also. Okay, so amending the weapons of mass destruction, the amendment of 2022, seeking to amend the Weapons of Mass Destruction Act 2005, it now becomes important for us to study what is India's stance on weapons of mass destruction, because countries like United States of America, like many other European nations, especially have been and who are a member of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organizations. They're the most powerful nations in the world, and they have created a sort of monopoly in nuclear proliferation, and also in the manufacturing and possession of weapons of mass destruction. They in fact also entered into a treaty called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was signed in 1969 and enforced in 1970, which was a discriminatory treaty as termed by India, and many other nations along with India like Pakistan withheld its assent and agreement to such treaty, because this treaty called Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, this gave unfettered powers to the big goons of the world like United States, like many other European nations who were dominating the world with their military and economic might. Okay, so this what do you call the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? It was a discriminatory treaty, since it was an agreement between these big countries of the world to not let the other developing and underdeveloped nations manufacture weapons of mass destruction or indulge in any nuclear proliferation. Other developing nations or underdeveloped nations were not allowed to resort to any nuclear proliferation, and only those countries, those nuclear powered countries who made this treaty. And this was quite surprising that these kinds of discriminatory treaties were being made under the nose of United Nations. And United Nations organization was a mute spectator to such discriminations being carried out in the name of treaties and conventions. So these big countries of the world, they decided that they won't let the other nations, the underdeveloped and developing nations who have not yet started their nuclear proliferation, okay, They won't let these countries make nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. They are also not going to provide them all the materials like uranium and thorium which is used in the nuclear proliferation. They are not even going to share with them any technical know-how which is important for any country to start with nuclear proliferation. So this was a discriminatory treaty. Now, India's stance, before I begin with this discussion on the PDF document I have shared with you, it is important for us to let us have a brief idea about India's stance. What is India's stance? As soon as this nuclear non-proliferation treaty was enforced in 1970, India's stance was very clear that India is not going to sign this nuclear non-proliferation treaty, albeit many other nations, many other countries like India, who were then underdeveloped or in a developing transition, they had signed the treaty because their necks were withheld by countries like United States, and they were made to sign the treaty under pressure, under coercion. They were threatened, they were intimidated, and as I said, that their necks were withheld by countries like United States, and they had to sign it. But like we can proudly say this, that India in 1970 very clearly declined to sign the treaty called Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it was then the then Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi who decided that India is going to start its nuclear proliferation right away. And it was in 1974, just 4 years, within a span of 4 years, India was able to conduct its first successful underground nuclear test at Pokhran in Rajasthan, which made India a nuclear resilient country. Okay, it was not a nuclear power. No country becomes a nuclear power in just one single successful test. It has to strike, like, that's just a start. Unless a country makes the nuclear weapons in numbers, like in good quantity, no nation can be called a nuclear powered nation. So India became nuclear capable country in 1974. And it was then in 1998, during the prime ministership of Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when India conducted its second successful underground nuclear test on 11th May 1998 at Pokhran, Rajasthan. And subsequently, Prime Minister came out and said that India is now a nuclear powered country, because India had then proliferated nuclear weapons in good numbers, in good quantities. So India's stance is very clear, but still India endeavored to have a domestic legislation on weapons of mass destruction in 2005. And that Weapons of Mass Destruction Act 2005 is now being amended by Weapons of Mass Destruction Amendment Bill 2022. And this now becomes important for us to read the provisions and find out what the act was about and what are the changes which are being made now. So what were the stipulations under the earlier act in 2005? Why did an amendment become necessary? The story so far. On April 5, 2022, the Weapons of Mass Destruction and their Delivery Systems Prohibition of Unlawful Activities Amendment Bill 2022 was introduced in the Lok Sabha. It was passed the next day. The bill amends the WMD and their Delivery Systems Prohibition of Unlawful Activities Act 2005, which prohibits the unlawful manufacture, transport, or transfer of WMD, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons, and their means of delivery. It is popularly referred to as the WMD Act. The recent amendment extends the scope of banned activities to include financing of already prohibited activities. Okay. Are you people getting my point? So the bill amends the WMD and the Delivery Systems Prohibition of Unlawful Activities Act 2005, which prohibits the unlawful manufacture, transport, or transfer of WMD chemical, biological and nuclear weapons and their means of delivery. It is popularly referred to as the WMD Act. What does the Act of 2005 do? What it does? It prohibits the unlawful manufacture, transport, or transfer of WMD, like be it chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, and their means of delivery. It is popularly referred to as the WMD Act. The recent amendment extends the scope of banned activities to include financing of already prohibited activities. Now, if somebody who is manufacturing or transporting or transferring the WMDs unlawfully and indulging in any means of delivery, it is a prohibited act since 2005. But what the present amendment intends to do, the present amendment extends the scope of banned activities to include even financing of already prohibited activities. And if somebody is financing the manufacture, transport, or transfer, or delivery of such WMDs, he is also going to face the music. Isn't it? Are you getting my point? So financing of any illegal activity is by it's a de facto crime. It's by itself. Okay. It's ipso facto a crime. If you're financing or sponsoring a criminal activity, it is an ipso facto a crime by itself. You don't need to define it separately. But in order to have a concrete framework with proper definitions and proper quantum of punishment, it was important to extend the scope of banned activities to include financing of already prohibited activities. Now, what was the purpose of the original WMD Act? The WMD and the Delivery Systems Prohibition of Unlawful Activities Act came into being in July 2005. Its primary objective was to provide an integrated and overarching legislation on prohibiting unlawful activities in relation to all three types of WMDs: their delivery systems and related materials, equipment and technologies. It instituted penalties for contravention of these provisions, such as imprisonment for a term not less than 5 years, extendable for life, as well as fines. The Act was passed to meet an international obligation enforced by the UN Security Council Resolution 1540 of 2005. So, what the WMD was passed in July 2005, and its primary objective was to provide an integrated and overarching legislation on prohibiting unlawful activities in relation to all three types of WMD: their delivery systems and related materials, equipment and technologies. Okay, three types of WMDs, that means chemical, biological, and nuclear. So it prohibited unlawful activities in relation to all three types of WMDs, their delivery systems and related materials, equipment, and technologies. It instituted penalties for contravention of these provisions, such as imprisonment for a term not less than 5 years, extendable for life, as well as fines. The Act was passed to meet an international obligation enforced by the UN Security Council Resolution 1540 of 2004. Now, this Act was passed following an international obligation on the shoulders of India, enforced by the United Nations Security Council resolution. The United Nations Security Council had already passed a resolution number 1540, which obligated India and many other countries like India to have a domestic legislation prohibiting the manufacture, transfer, transportation, or delivery of any WMDs of any three types, of all the three types. Okay, so this was a Security Council resolution. Now, what is this? What do you mean by, what do you understand by United Nations Security Council? what it is. What is United Nations Security Council? What is the United Nations Security Council? One of the organs of UN. Riaz, very good. Principal organ of UN which ensures international peace and security. Yes, Prableen. It's not principal, like all the organs are important, like General Assembly is the principal organ. United Nations Security Council is one of the 6 organs of the United Nations, and thankfully, you people are not calling it an agency. But you might do this vice versa, that if I am asking you about WHO or UNICEF, you would also call it an organ. This is what people usually do. That there is a difference between the agencies of the United Nations and the funds and programs it runs, and the organs of the United Nations. The organs are only 6. Any agency may come and go. It won't affect the existence of an identity of the United Nations. United Nations but is made up of those 6 organs. United Nations General Assembly, Security Council, Trusteeship Council, Economic and Social Council, the Secretariat, and the International Court of Justice. These are the 6 organs of the United Nations, and these are the they together make up the United Nations organization. United Nations General Assembly works like a world parliament. Okay, it works like a world parliament. Just like your parliament functions, exactly the United Nations General Assembly works or functions. Okay, United Nations Security Council, it has 5 permanent members: United States, United Kingdom, Russia, France, and China. Now these are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, each of them enjoying and exercising the power of veto. That means no decision can be taken with a majority, but with an absolute majority. Even if one country is vetoing against a resolution, that resolution cannot be passed. Okay, under the guise that it was already passed by 4 countries and it was opposed by 1 country, no. This majority decision is not acceptable in United Nations Security Council. All the 5 members, they have the power of veto, and they can exercise this power of veto to rule out or to read down any resolution. Okay, while there are non-permanent members of United Nations which are in 10, the figure of 10, there are 10 other non-permanent members which enjoy or hold the membership of the Security Council, non-permanent membership of the Security Council, for a term of 2 years. 2 साल के लिए हर कंट्री 2 साल के लिए नॉन परमानेंट मेंबर यूनाइटेड नेशन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल का बनता है. ओके ओके सो यूनाइटेड नेशन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल हैव 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members which enjoy and hold the non-permanent membership for a term of 2 years. Okay, now this resolution was 1540, that every other country needs to have what? Needs to have a domestic legislation. Okay, what is the UNSCR 1540? In April 2004, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 1540 to address the growing threat of non-state actors gaining access to WMD material, equipment, or technology to undertake acts of terrorism. Now, because of this growing menace, because WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, they should and they are in fact a complete monopoly of the states. Complete monopoly of the states. That means the state governments should, should manufacture them under their own supervision as per the guidelines and under the direct supervision of International Atomic Energy Agency. That's what the states are supposed to do. If they are indulging in any nuclear proliferation or any weapons or manufacture of weapons of mass destruction or doing anything with that WMD, they have to do it under the direct supervision of agencies like International Atomic Energy Agency. Okay, and as per the guidelines framed by the United Nations. Okay, in April 2004, this concern was raised on the tables of Security Council that non-state actors, what I said, non-state actors are gaining access to the WMD material. Non-state actors means the private people, the private groups, the radical groups, okay, especially the groups which are which are being fed on the soil of countries like Pakistan. Okay, there are groups, there are people, private people in whose hands these WMDs are falling. They are having unfettered access to these WMDs to undertake acts of terrorism. Terrorism is not something new. We all know about it, what has happened, what are the events, what are the attack, what are, what are the events that have already taken place. You must have an idea, you must be having an idea about the acts of terrorism and what these terrorist groups do. How do they attack the other country? What weapons do they use? They definitely, nobody can deny this fact that they use weapons of mass destruction. They use chemical bombs. They use, hard conventional weapons to attack the other country, okay, or to attack their targets. So they are non-state actors. All these groups, all these radical groups, okay, all these radical groups, they are not having they are having good access to the WMD material, and that is why they are able to undertake acts of terrorism by using them. Okay, they are non-state actors. The WMDs should be under the complete control of the states. Now, once this started happening, because already in 2000, the World Trade Center in the United States was, what happened? That World Trade Center was attacked. It was a suicide attack, right? On 9/11, the 9/11 attack. Okay, so there was already a growing concern in the international fora regarding the access to WMD, the access of non-state actors to the WMD material. So there was a resolution. In order to address this challenge to international peace and security, UNSCR 1540 established binding obligations on all UN member states under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. So United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 established binding obligations on all United Nations member states. That means all the member states of the United Nations are obligated or were obligated by UNSCR 1540 under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. Nations were mandated to take and enforce effective measures against proliferation of WMD, their means of delivery, and related materials to non-state actors. Okay. Proliferation of WMDs, that nations were mandated to take and enforce effective measures, and how the nations are going to, if some radical group, for example, is growing on Indian territory, what is then the job of the Indian government? to bring such groups, to bring such people to the books of law, right? To bring them to books, right? So nations were mandated that every nation member of United Nations is mandated henceforth to have a domestic legislation regarding, control or checking the excess of non-state actors or private individuals or private groups to WMD material, against proliferation of WMDs, their means of delivery and related materials to non-state actors. Then UNSCR 1540 enforced 3 primary obligations upon the nation states: to not provide any form of support to non-state actors seeking to acquire WMD. Okay, UNSCR 1540 enforced 3 primary obligations upon nation states. 3 primary obligations upon nation states: to not provide any form of support to non-state actors seeking to acquire WMD related materials or their means of delivery, to adopt and enforce laws criminalizing the possession and acquisition of such items by non-state actors. Okay, the 3 primary obligations is created upon the member nations of United Nations by UNSCR 1540. 1, to not provide any form of support to non-state actors seeking to acquire WMD. If any private group or private individual or private organization is seeking to acquire any WMD, the state is not going to provide them any support or related materials or their means of delivery. Okay. Second, to adopt and enforce laws criminalizing the possession and acquisition of such items by non-state actors. That even if any non-state actor or actors are possessing and acquiring the WMDs, they need to adopt and enforce such criminal laws to make it a criminal activity and bring such people to books. Third, to adopt and enforce domestic controls over relevant materials in order to prevent the proliferation. जितना भी आपका relevant material है, okay, all the relevant materials, all the relevant materials regarding the proliferation, which is used in the proliferation, should be under the complete control of the state, and there should be laws adopted and enforced to ensure domestic controls over relevant materials in order to prevent their proliferation. Unless and until the state is not having a complete and absolute control over the relevant materials which are used in the nuclear proliferation or any proliferation of weapon of mass destruction, the non-state actors will continue to have access to such relevant materials, and they are going to they're going to continue with their proliferation of WMDs. So the state should take control of them completely. It was to meet these obligations that enactment and enforcement of legislations to punish the unlawful and unauthorized manufacture, acquisition, possession, development, and transport of WMD became necessary. Okay. Now, what has the amendment added to the existing Act? This was all about the Act 2005, which is a brief historical background. Why was it needed? What prompted India to have a domestic legislation? And what were the 3 obligations imposed upon India or many other nations by UNSCR 1540? Okay. Now, what has the amendment added to the existing Act? The amendment expands the scope to include prohibition of financing of any activity related to WMD and the delivery systems. Okay. People are today financing, there are so many activities, there are so many financial funds which are created to sponsor and extend financial aid to terrorist groups so that They can procure relevant materials for proliferation of WMDs. Okay. Now what are they? Like for example, you must have heard of Hawala transactions. Have you ever heard about Hawala transactions? What are Hawala transactions? What are Hawala transactions? Money laundering, not exactly, Nikhil. Please try to be a bit more specific. Transferring money without actually moving it. How, Mehul? Allah Melu. Money transferred without movement. Tarun, yes. Transaction in which money is channelized through illegal means. Yes, illegal means. And you know, Hawala transaction is a term which has come down to be specifically used for financing of terror activities. That if somebody is sending money to terrorist groups across the borders or beyond the borders, or vice versa is happening, if someone else beyond the border sitting across the border is financing any terror activity in our country. So Hawala is a term which has been specifically, which has come down to be attributed with the financing of any terror activity. Okay. Chitra, Lekha, Taran, all of you are very close to the answer, but this is the specific thing that I have told you regarding Hawala transactions. Okay. It is like a de facto attribution of the term with the financing of terror activities. Okay. So the amendment expands the scope to include prohibition of financing of any activity. Up till now, the financing of any activity related to WMD was not covered by any criminal legislation. But this new Amendment Bill 2022 intends to expand the scope to include prohibition of financing of any activity related to WMD and their delivery systems. To prevent such financing, the central government shall have the power to freeze, seize, or attach funds, financial assets, or economic resources of suspected individuals, whether owned, held, or controlled directly or indirectly. It also prohibits persons from making finances or related services available for other persons indulging in such activity. I don't know how far this this power given to the central government is feasible and in consonance with the constitutional principles and fundamental rights, that if the central government, for example, is given an unfettered power to freeze, seize, or attach funds, financial assets, or economic resources of individuals on mere suspicious grounds, then this is like a judgment before trial. You can't really do that unless and until a person is properly tried in the court of law. No attachment of his financial assets or economic resources or funds can take place by the central government. But in this new bill, to prevent such financing, the central government shall have the power to freeze, seize, or attach funds, financial assets, or economic resources of suspected individuals, whether owned, held, or controlled directly or indirectly. It also prohibits persons from making finances or related services available for other persons indulging in such activity. Okay, now why was this amendment necessary? UNSCR 1540 sorry UNSCR 1540 undergoes periodic reviews to determine the success of its implementation and to identify gaps in enforcement. Now, United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 is not just a resolution, but rather it empowers the Security Council to keep reviewing after a considerable period of time, to keep reviewing the performances of all the members of the United Nations on this front. What have they done so far? Did they make an endeavor to bring a legislation in consonance with the UNSCR 1540? Okay, so UNSCR 1540 undergoes periodic reviews to determine the success of its implementation and to identify gaps in enforcement. In one such review undertaken in 2016, it was concluded that the risk of proliferation to non-state actors is increasing due to rapid advances in science, technology, and international commerce. Okay, the statement of objects and reasons of the bill presented in India echoes these developments for having made the amendment necessary. Two specific gaps are being addressed. First, as the relevant organizations at the international level, such as the Financial Action Task Force, have expanded the scope of targeted financial sanctions and demand tighter controls on the financing of WMD activities, India's own legislation has been harmonized to align with international benchmarks. Now, the statements of objects and reasons of the bill, what they say, there are two specific gaps which are being addressed here. First, the relevant organizations at the international level, like the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, is an international organization that is empowered to look into the various transactions of money which is like taking place at a very larger scale from one place to another. They have expanded the scope of targeted financial sanctions and demand tighter controls on financing of WMD activities. There are targeted financial sanctions and they have demanded tighter controls on the financing of WMD activities. India's own legislation has been harmonized to align with international benchmarks, and these are the international benchmarks, and India has attempted to align its own legislation with these international benchmarks. Like, its own legislation should squarely fall in consonance with these international benchmarks. So this is the statement of objects and reasons that whatever is being done at the international level to address these kinds of issues, India is also trying to do it at the domestic level. Secondly, with the advancements in technologies, new kinds of threats have emerged that were not sufficiently catered for in the existing legislations. Okay. Now, there are advancement in technologies. Like some time back, until some time back, there was financial activities which could take place through the internet and some net banking, net banking things like net banking. Okay, so now international until some time back there were transactions or technology that could be used up till those times, okay, like net banking. But now the transfer of money, the transfer of funds has become very easy. So with the advancements in technologies, the transactions in money have become more fluid. These notably include in developments in the field of drones or unauthorized work in biomedical labs that could maliciously be used for terrorist activity. Therefore, the amendment keeps pace with evolving threats. In fact, domestic Okay, domestic legislations and international measures that address issues of WMD security cannot afford to become fossilized. They must be agile and amenable to modifications in keeping with the changing tactics of non-state actors. What more should India do? India's responsible behavior and actions on non-proliferation are well recognized. It has a strong statutory national export control system and is committed to preventing proliferation of WMD. This includes transit and transshipment controls, retransfer control, technology transfer controls, brokering controls, and end-use based controls. Every time India takes additional steps to fulfill new obligations, it must showcase its legislative, regulatory, and enforcement frameworks to the international community. So like India should do more and more now, because India has now seems to have acquired a good place in the international community. And India's responsible behavior and actions on non-proliferation are well recognized. It has a strong statutory national export control system and is committed to preventing proliferation of WMDs. Okay, now at the domestic level, this amendment will have to be enforced through proper outreach measures to industry and other stakeholders to make them realize their obligations under the new provisions. India's outreach efforts with respect to the WMD Act have straddled both region-specific and sector-specific issues. Similar efforts will be necessary to explain the new aspects of the law. It is also necessary that India keeps WMD security in international focus. There is no room for complacency. Even countries which do not have WMD technology have to be sensitized to their role in the control framework to prevent weak links in the global control system. India can offer help to other countries on developing national legislation, institutions, and regulatory framework through the IAEA or on bilateral basis. That's what I told you some time back, that any country who indulges in nuclear proliferation or proliferation of WMDs have to do it under the direct supervision and as per the guidelines of International Atomic Energy Agency. It is this agency of United Nations which is going to supervise your proliferation activities, and it's going to submit its report accordingly, that whether you are complying with all the guidelines or not. Okay, could the amendment become troublesome to people on account of mistaken identity? Could the amendment become troublesome to people on account of mistaken identity? Now, because there are identities which can be taken mistakenly. In the discussion on the bill in Parliament, some members expressed concern on whether the new legislation could make existing business entities or people in the specific sector susceptible to a case of mistaken identity. The External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, however, assured the House that such chances were minimal, since identification of concerned individuals, entities, would be based on a long list of specifics. What is the international significance of these legislation and what is in it for India? Preventing acts of terrorism that involve WMD or their delivery systems requires building a network of national and international measures in which all nation states are equally invested. Such actions are necessary to strengthen global enforcement of standards relating to the export of sensitive items and to prohibit even the financing of such activities, to ensure that non-state actors, including terrorist and black market networks, do not gain access to such materials. Sharing of best practices on legislations and their implementation can enable harmonization of global WMD controls. So basically, this revolves around prevention of acts of terrorism that involve WMDs or their delivery systems. Okay. International significance is that just like India, many other countries are having their own domestic legislations exactly like this. And every country is somehow contributing towards this issue at its own level. And you can say that just like great things are done by series of small things brought together, just like get all the countries if together are making a concerted effort through their own domestic legislations, through their own respective domestic legislations, then it's going to make a concerted effort at the international forum, okay, to check and to attack these kinds of terrorist activities. We have to, break these networks. We have to break these nexus of terrorists. Okay, such actions are necessary to strengthen global enforcement of standards relating to the export of sensitive items and to prohibit even the financing of such activities to ensure that non-state actors, including terrorist and black market networks, do not gain access to such materials. That is at the core of this amendment and the core of the resolution. Okay, India initially had reservations on enacting laws mandated by the UNSCR. This is not seen by India as an appropriate body for making such a demand. However, given the danger of WMD terrorism that India faces in view of the difficult neighborhood that it inhabits, the country supported the resolution and has fulfilled its requirements. Okay, it is in India's interest to facilitate highest controls at the international level and adopt them at the domestic level. Having now updated its own legislation, India can demand the same of others, especially from those in its neighborhood that have a history of proliferation and of supporting terrorist organizations. So this is like creating and making an attack on all the people who are anyhow connected with the financial, sponsoring of terrorist activities, this new amendment bill. Okay, so this is the gist we have already read. If you have any question, anything to add or supplement what we have discussed today, you're most welcome to do that. Sumesh is asking, sir, non-state actors refers to any private individual or private organization or private group, okay, which is not a part of the state. Which is not a part of the state. That means non-state actors. Okay, then if things are clear to you, I'm then signing off. And let's meet tomorrow with a new topic.